I can see it.
So this week we have the pleasure of interacting with a practitioner of global leadership. And one of the cornerstones of this course is not just learning the intellectual or theoretical piece of global leadership, but also engaging with practitioners who are on the ground and are actually engaging with some of the concepts that we'll learn in their daily work. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Charles Mudiwa, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Stanbic Bank in Kenya. And he has an extensive history in the banking sector all over Africa. And I am sure that his experiences will help us to put some of our learning concepts into focus as we learn about his career. So Mr. Mudiwa, I'll say welcome, and also thank you for your time and the expertise that you will share with our course on global leadership. So welcome to you and thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyesha. It's a pleasure joining your class today.
So I have a list of 8 questions that will guide our conversation around global leadership, and I'm particularly interested in your personal and professional adventures in the field of global leadership. So let me ask you first, can you describe your current role for us and also tell us about the impact you hope to make in the work that you do?
Yeah, so my current role is I'm the Chief Executive of Stanbic Bank Kenya. Stanbic Bank Kenya is part of a subsidiary of Standard Bank Group, which is the largest banking group in Africa, operating in 20 countries, and I run the Kenyan operation and the South Sudan operation of that group. Now, from an impact, so this is from an impact point of view, we believe that, and our purpose is Africa is how we drive a growth. So we plan to, or we aspire to make a difference in Africa, drive growth in Africa. But I think if you want to put it in short, we plan to make African dreams happen through provision of financial services. And that's really what we plan to do, and make a difference in Africa, economically, socially, and environmentally.
Good, good. So this is a question that doesn't necessarily have to do with your career, but I always like to ask when I'm speaking to practitioners and scholars. So if you were not a banker, what would you be doing right now?
That's a nice question. Actually, I always think I'll probably be a professor, actually, or teaching. I love teaching. I enjoy it, and I did it once before, so it's something that I'll probably go back to. And I feel after so many years in banking, I'll probably give back into community or into the world the amount of knowledge that I have, because I've acquired a lot of knowledge across the years, and it would be a waste just not to use it back and give it back. So I'll find myself in one form or the other teaching, may not be at the university, but some form of teaching where I give back to younger people and give them experience.
Good, that's good to hear. And I'm hoping that the next time we speak, you'll be telling us about your adventures in your second career, which sounds like will be teaching.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm actually actively working towards that now. I mean, yesterday and I think today I met a couple of people who are actually quite actively interested in seeing how we can put together this dream happen. So it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I believe I actually can make a difference. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good, good. So with that, please give us a summary of your career in banking. Tell us where it started and also the countries where you've worked and some of the highlights of your career.
Well, I started my career in banking in Zimbabwe, and it was almost an interesting kind of experience because I joined an organization which was at that time a lending organization, and they then decided, no, we want to make a full big bank, and I was chosen as one of the young executives at that time to spearhead the conversion of this organization into a commercial bank. I was given exposure at that time in Ireland, the Bank of Ireland, and the Rabobank in Netherlands, where I kind of started to understand what banking is about and how to do that. I had done some courses in banking because I studied economics, and one of my minor subjects was actually banking. And from there on, I went into banking, set up a bank, and got it running. So it is still running up to now. Once you did that, then I started moving on, worked in Zimbabwe, joined the Standard Bank, which is I'm working with now, and then moved from Zimbabwe, worked in South Africa, spent several years there, and quite an interesting experience in South Africa, because at that point in time, South Africa had just gained democracy, and there's a lot of changes and transitions happening, and it was a time of change, and also we got involved in banking, setting up some of the infrastructure required to deal with a new South Africa. From South Africa, I moved to Malawi, where we just bought a new bank, and my task was to build this bank and grow it, which we did successfully. Then did some work in Zambia, and then I'm in Kenya. So I've seen banking across, well, certain Netherlands, in Ireland, in a couple of other African countries, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Kenya, and South Sudan. So it's quite an interesting kind of journey across the globe, so to speak.
And is there anything that stands out in those countries where you worked?
Yeah, I think what stands out for me is the difference that you can make and impact people's lives by providing financial services. And you see a lot of people with dreams and aspirations, and you actually help them to become somebody and to become a big kind of person. And I think it's something that we take for granted. I mean, currently there's an share that I would share is one where we made a difference in people's lives by providing them with funding, and they grow. And with a young lady whom we actually helped since I've been here, and she basically was a housekeeper, domestic worker, and she had this whole aspiration to own a business. And she started trading in clothes, and we gave her a first loan, a very small loan, almost a personal loan. And then she bought that and started trading. I mean, as we speak now, she actually owns a wholesale that actually buys clothes across the world and retails them. Now, it's a very interesting experience just to see someone starting as a house worker, house help, literally, and overnight becoming a full-time business person and owning something. I mean, that's the difference and the power that you actually make to say, I've helped people and I've made a difference to them in terms of what they need to be. In South Africa, I think the highlight was us helping bring bank to the Black townships at that point in time, and just making a difference in launching what we call financial inclusion. And when I was there, I was in charge of a project where we were looking at how do we bring financial inclusion to the Black masses in South Africa, and just working through that process and helping people to get into banking and to start learning and increase financial inclusion. And as a result of the project we did, the financial inclusion moved from 46%, and I think now it's ranging almost close to 85, 90%. So that's the sort of work that makes a difference in terms of making a difference in people's lives, changing lives, contributing to them, and making people better people what they are.
Fantastic. So here's my next question for you. How then do you define global leadership?
Yeah, global leadership is a number of parts to it. And when you say global leadership, I mean, for a start, I mean, by just using the word global, it assumes you have a full view of a global environment and global perspective. That is, you see the whole world in global perspective. And your thinking, therefore, has to think global. And it's an interesting kind of experience because it then brings a lot of dimensions to it. Number one, there's a piece around being what we call culturally literate, ability to understand different cultures and being able to understand and decipher them across the world. And being able to understand that when you move from Ireland and you move, like in my case, I spent some time in Ireland, I spent some time in Netherlands, in South Africa. I mean, I did spend some time in the US as well. I mean, I did an advanced management program at Columbia. So you meet Americans that are different from the Far East and in Singapore, they're different from people. So that ability to understand different cultures is fundamental and critical in a global context. Because what you don't know is what you think is wrong might actually be right in a different culture. And how you look at people might be different. And therefore, it's important to understand that. The second piece about this is global thinking. Ability to see things in a global trajectory rather than just in a particular fashion. The way the Far East think about the world and the politics of the world is very different from the way Americans think about the politics of the world, and is very different from the way Europeans think about it, and different from the way Africans think about it. There may be common traits across, but we all have a different angle, which is influenced by our culture, by our bringing and our perspective and geopolitics and our interests strategically and otherwise. So that ability to see the global in a different way and understand why certain events happening from a geopolitics and just understand the global trajectory is an important piece about this kind of role. The third piece about global leadership is your ability to be able to deal with diversity. And I know it's something that we talk about it. We tend to think about diversity from a gender point of view, But I think now diversity is also about generation diversity. My generation, your generation, our kids' generation, I mean, a lot of our younger kind of people is very different. The average age in my bank, for example, is 35. And therefore, my understanding and dealing with them, I'm in my 50s, is very different. I have to think like they think and be able to understand how they see the world and their challenges that they deal with. I mean, and understand what they're looking for in their aspirations. And for them, they're looking at values, they're looking at things that make a difference to them and how they can contribute. Loyalty is not one of the strong points you expect from them. And hierarchy is not something that you expect from them. So they have to deal with those things. So the Gen Z, Gen Ys, millennials, they're in a different space from the silent and the baby boomers. So you have to start thinking about how do they think and how do we need to think about that. Then of course there's gender diversity, understanding how do you deal with gender across different cultures and different ways of thinking about it. What are those things? How do you cope with diversity in that respect? Then of course you've got a religion, which is also important, which comes into play. How do you deal with that? A Muslim versus a Christian, how do you deal with the Buddhists, and how do you deal with Hindu? So our ability to understand all those different religions and be able to understand what drives them, what motivates them. So when Diwali happens, what must you do? And how do you deal with them? When they talk about a Hajj, what does it mean? Because they materially affect how people work and how they think. Of course, Christmas and Easter for Christians, what does it mean? So you have to have that perspective of understanding the different diversity that you have to deal with. Adaptability is important in terms of just being able to learn to adapt to different situations and get there. So I remember when I was being interviewed for this job, and I was coming from Zambia, and I remember the board asked me, say, well, you're coming into here, you're coming as the chief executive, we expect you to be able to compete and work with people who have lived this country their whole lives. How are you going to build networks? And we don't expect you to spend 5 years building networks. You have to build them fast and build relationships fast. So you have to create networks and be able to understand how you create networks and linkages and connections which help you do things. So for example, in my case, I'm a Rotarian. So by just being a Rotarian, it gives me access to networks globally. So when I move from country to country, I automatically can associate with the Rotarians across the world and be able to talk to them every country. The first thing I do, I look for the next Rotarian club and I go around Rotary clubs. I build relationships and networks. So you have an opening place that gives you access to that and being able to do that. So belonging to global networks is important. That allow you to have that access to global network of relationships with friends. So alumni, for me, for example, at Columbia, from our class, we meet once a year. I mean, we meet in different parts of the world and have relationships, and COVID has just ruined it. So we're doing Zoom calls this year. We had to do one. We've done 3 of them now. I'm an alumni from University of Leeds, Beckett in London, in the UK. So I've got a whole group of friends from that as well. Then alumni from I did a small program at MIT, so we also have alumni from there. So all those are global networks that I have that allow me, and of course you've got church and other social gatherings that allow you to link up with all these people. And as a result, your global perspective and understanding is actually quite interesting. So for example, when the bombing in Lebanon happened, one of my classmates actually is from Lebanon. I mean, so while the news was going on, before even the news happened, I already knew about it. We were already discussing it in our group, and we were sharing what was happening and how things were happening and what is going on there. So we actually could get insights about what was going on and get updates from there. So I find sometimes by the time I read the newspaper, by just going to my alumni groups, I actually get first-hand information about the world and even much more informed information than I do from other things. So that kind of gives you an idea of what global leadership is about, how you can engage with it and deal with it.
That was a fantastic answer. It was very extensive, and you actually answered my next question, which would have been, from your perspective, what are 3 top qualities or characteristics a leader must have in order to lead effectively in global and multicultural spaces? So you've given us a lot to consider in terms of those qualities and characteristics. Is there anything you'd like to add to that point?
I suppose there are a couple of these. One of the things that I would add on that, which is the ability to learn. I mean, and I think we should never underestimate. I mean, seeing I'm talking to students, I think it's also important that have an inquisitive mind and just be a very fast learner, which allows you to to kind of learn fast. I mean, one of the things that I always I mentor a number of young leaders, and the first question they ask me is, what must I do when I get a new job? I got promoted. I first say the first thing you do is learn. Just take your time to learn, to understand. And the moment you open your mind up to learning, people are so willing to teach you and to explain things. And the moment you ask questions, people are willing to cooperate and to do that. So you survive because people are willing to teach you. They show you how to do things, and you learn to things. So learning is one of the strongest attributes of actually a global leader as a person in your own personal attributes.
Mm-hmm. Good. I have two more questions. So this is the second to last question that we have. So what challenges and opportunities exist for global leaders?
Well, I like to start from opportunities. I like to be positive. So I'll start from opportunities. What are the opportunities? I mean, the opportunities are a global network. It's just fantastic to be able to pick up the phone and call someone across the world and say, hey, I'm looking for this. What do you think? Or get a view about it. How are you dealing with this? I think that gives you a very rich life as a leader, and just from a point of view of being leader. So that global network is indispensable, and it's fantastic, and it's great, and it helps that. I mean, people talk today about what we call social capital, which is your ability, how much money do you have, and how much. It's not so much as about the ability of what is sitting in your bank balance, but it's about the network that you own, because it's worth far much more than any money you can have, because you can raise any amount of money or do anything in the world because of the social network that you have. So your ability to create a social network is invaluable, and it's important that it allows you, it opens doors for you. I mean, in my job, for example, I found that, I can pick up the call and call 4 or 5 presidents that I can think of right now and be able to say, Mr. President, I want to talk to you about this. I've met presidents, even former American presidents. I haven't met the current one, but certainly I've met 2 of the previous ones. Because of different settings, I've met, I think, 2 British prime ministers. In my previous settings, I've met, Russian prime minister, the current one, president. So you kind of end up meeting people in different platforms where you meet different people because of that ability. So I don't have their personal numbers, but at least I've been able to talk to them and have the engagement with them. So that gives you that platform that allows you to do that. So the global network is a big advantage of that. The second one is a global perspective. I mean, when you talk to people, you have a much broader perspective about life and much broader understanding what's happening in the world. And it gives you a lot more gratification about what you're doing, and your aspirations are much more global and much broader in perspective about how you think of life. So it allows you to have that ability. And then just the idea of a global experience itself, I think it's a lot of people, I mean, when I listen to people, most people say, I want to travel, I want to see the world. But to actually live in different countries, different parts of the world, and be able to share experience there, I think it's far more enriching than even just traveling as a tourist to see what happens there. So it gives you that ability. Challenges, I suppose you miss your school friends. I mean, and you kind of miss the home base kind of thing. So there is a piece around that you miss that home base and that ability to be able to do that. And also sometimes you can lose a lot of relationships because then you're never, I mean, you think about it, if you're in your home base, you meet every Sunday, you play golf together, you see each other. So, and then in a global context, if you're traveling around like I do, you tend to then miss and lose that connectivity with people around that. So ability to then develop deep, lasting relationships can also create a problem, because then you are always on the move, and that becomes a problem, and that can be a challenge in terms of relationships. So there's a piece of you from a social point of view that's lost. And I think you lose that aspect of a social connectivity and deep lasting relationships with people, because you're always on the move and you're always trying that. So that can become a challenge in its own right, in terms of how you do that from a point of view of that. And that's, I think, one piece that I feel is a big, there's a social cost that comes with that, which I think you tend to lose.
Mm-hmm. So my students are in various industries. They're in the medical field, they're in education, they're in finance, they're in science and technology, but we gather with a common interest in learning about global leadership. So for them as students, what advice would you have for them as doctoral students who are interested in global leadership?
I would say, I mean, the first thing is, I mean, think about it from a point of view of wanting to learn and understand more and having a global experience. That's what I would say. But also see the world in a systems kind of environment where I think people talk today about VUCA, the volatile, the uncertain, the complex, and the ambiguous. And I think your ability to see that the VUCA world in real terms actually happens, that you start to see the global perspective of life and see things in a different way than what an ordinary person would see. So you start to see this, how the world comes together, how it all pieces together, and try and learn as much as possible. So as students, while you might get prescribed texts and other things, I think venture out and take risks. Go out and say, let me go and find out, what do they think of, how do people in Korea live? How do people in Japan live? What do they do? How do they see life? What is the culture in Mexico? What is the culture in Indonesia? What is the culture in Chile or Venezuela? And give yourself, or go somewhere far out that you've never done, and say, what happens in these places and how can I learn new things? And what is the leadership culture and the things that they do there when you're leading a team in a different culture, and how do they do it differently? So you find, by doing so, you actually find out new things, new experiences, but it's actually enriching experience that gives you a different way of seeing life, but also a different way of experiencing life, but also a different way of how you can actually motivate people and inspire them. Because leadership is ultimately about motivation and inspiring and being able to get people get fulfilled and do what they want to do. So that's actually what I see is how people can be and how you can bring that all together and make it all work together. And I mean, I subscribe to a guy called Ralph Stacey. I mean, he's a British professor, and he wrote a lot about systems management and systems thinking. In fact, my thesis was actually around that and the complexity of leadership, but it's all about systems. And so global leadership gives you an understanding of the global system, if you want to call it like that, and how you can manage it from simplicity to complicated, as they said, to complex, and ultimately into chaos. And your ability to navigate between simplicity and chaos actually is an interesting experience. And I find it quite interesting. Like COVID now, I mean, it sits on the far right of, if you use Ralph Stas's model of chaos. And how do you lead a team and bring the chaos into symbol? Because the guy who's sitting on the shop floor wants a simple answer. They don't want to understand the complexity of COVID and the error coefficients and all that things. They just want to wake up in the morning and know they're safe. They can go to work and their family is safe. The complexity they leave it to you and to what about. So it's that ability to bring chaos into simplicity for an average guy as a leader.
Fantastic. So I've asked all the questions that I wanted to ask, and is there anything that you would like to leave us with before we close?
Oh, closing remarks. I think my closing remarks would be, I would just say, I think it's important to learn, but I think also to decide on your own, what is your purpose? So because the first thing that has happened, I mean, if you go to Peter Senger's thinking around personal mastery, I think that's an important aspect that we all need to think about. What do I stand for? And who am I? Because people follow leaders, not necessarily because they're bright or they're good. People follow leaders because they stand for something. And what is it, that one thing that you actually stand for, that people that are going to follow you will believe and see in you? And that thing must stand right through your character, must go through your behavior, must go through everything that you do and you say. That's what will hold people together. And that's what makes people follow you. So one question I would ask you and challenge you to say is, what is the one thing, what is your purpose statement as an individual? What do you stand for? And what would you like people to see in you that they'll follow through you? And as Peter Senge said, what is your personal mastery?
So those were all my questions for the interview, but before I close, I wanted to ask you to do me a favor and share our connection, because you and I do have a connection beyond me asking you to serve as an interviewee for my project. So if you would please share how you and I have our connection.
Yeah, well, Nyasha is my, I would say you're my daughter, so it's kind of fascinating being interviewed by my own daughter, and I really enjoyed this, and thank you very much for asking for this question, and really, this is awesome, and thank you very much for this, and I wish you all the best. And guys, you really have a great professor. I can trust me. I do know this young lady very well. She do a great job, and she really is very sincere, and she'll do a great job in showing me the way. I mean, I've learned a few things from her myself in terms of leadership. She's a family organizer, and she's always right there. So I can assure you, she does show the leadership and practices the leadership she speaks about. So it's really true.
Thank you. It's been an honor speaking with you and learning from you. And I hope that this is the first of many conversations that we'll have about global leadership.
Great. Thanks you, and all the best. And I wish you all the best.